So basically, we address the nexus between uncertainty and family dynamics, which has been a topic with a growing interest in the last decades. First of all, because of changes related to globalization, labor market deregulation, more recently, the effects of a great recession that seemingly decreased fertility in most Western countries. So basically, the COVID-19 pandemic happened in this context and escalated uncertainty again at the core of public debate and personal lives. So what we assume is that COVID-induced uncertainty and economic uncertainty in particular might strongly affect family life courses, and in particular, we address the impact on union formation practices based on an online survey experiment that we implemented during the Italian lockdown. So when it comes to the relation between marriage and cohabitation decisions, of course, there are two main theoretical fields, let's say theoretical areas that deal with cohabitation. We have a second demographic transition that accounts for the diffusion of cohabitation and decline of marriage, stressing the role of ideational factors. So it doesn't really give some hints on the effect of uncertainty. On the contrary, the pattern of disadvantage hypothesis more explicitly state that among economically deprived groups, for instance, the lower educated, or during periods of economic crisis, of economic uncertainty, cohabitation might be preferred because of it is more compatible with uncertainty, being temporary, more easily reversible. So one might hypothesize that COVID-induced uncertainty would be negatively associated with marriage and positively associated with cohabitation decisions. So the issue is how to conceptualize and operationalize economic uncertainty, especially when related to COVID-19 pandemic. Several studies analyzed the effect of economic uncertainty on family behavior. Usually decisions have been related to current or past unemployment condition, experience of temporary contracts, or more subjective measures like the perception of insecurity of current labor market status or financial situation. That is basically the literature focused on previous or current socioeconomic situation. Whereas uncertainty, and especially in a context like COVID-19, we argue, primarily means lack of clarity about the future prospects of individuals. So what we do in our work is to relate to a very recent framework, a narrative framework that provides some concepts to operationalize the influence of the future on family decisions. More precisely, what we argue is that when people face an uncertain situation, regardless of their objective condition, they make expectations about the future. For instance, the expected duration of a COVID-19 emergency might have an influence on family plans, regardless of the objective situation that people are facing. At the same time, people can shift from the expected course of action thanks to their imaginative capacity. People have family imaginaries. That means they wish to have a certain type of family in their future. And this would translate during the COVID-19 emergency that even during difficulties, individuals with a positive family imaginary may decide to cohabit or to get married. Expectations and imaginaries are part of what we refer to as personal narratives of the future that influence family decisions over and above previous or current socioeconomic status. This is our hypothesis. And these personal narratives of the future are strongly influenced by media channeled narratives. In the case of COVID-19, this was absolutely important because most of the information on the evolution of a pandemic and the time before the return to normality were based on media information. And this is more true in the Italian context. Talking a bit about Italy and COVID-19, it is well known that Italy has been the first severe case of COVID-19 pandemic in the Western world. We experienced the longest complete lockdown of approximately 2 months between March and April. And at the end of April, Italy already had 25,000 COVID deaths, let's say, and there has been a strong role of media. There was this ritual at 6 p.m. of Italians gathered in front of the television. You see the picture in the left, so there were people counting the number of new contagions, of deaths every evening, and the TV announcement of President Conte had a higher share than usual match of Italian national team in football. So there was a huge influence of media. So what we did is to implement an online survey based at the premises of the company Lucid. This will be a combination of a longitudinal survey because we will have a follow-up in the next months and an experimental approach. We implement an experiment on a sample of individuals, 1,800 individuals in a romantic relationship without being married. So we have both individuals cohabiting and approximately 1,000 of individuals living apart together. And we collected data during the lockdown, so in the last week of the Italian lockdown. And of course, we had to deal with online sampling, but we tried to use quota sampling, focusing on men and women aged 20-40. We set quotas for gender, age, and the region or the province of residence in case of the northern regions. So what we did is to implement an experimental design to grasp the effect of narratives of the future. So respondents were exposed to a mock news bulletin concerning the expected end of a pandemic emergency that should have sounded quite realistic for the respondent because the Prime Minister announced that there will be a task force of academics to give guidelines for the return to normality. Of course, then in the end, the respondents were debriefed about the fictitious nature of the information, but still they were presented with this mock news bulletin and were randomly assigned one of the 5 treatments, which are scenarios with a different expected duration before the return to normality. And we then asked them their union intentions, marriage and cohabitation, in light of expected duration of the emergency. And we analyzed changes in intention with respect to the intention that they stated before the treatment. So the treatment looked like this. I will focus on the most important part. Basically, we said that there is a task force composed by leading experts of the coronavirus pandemic that obtained short predictions about the future of the pandemic in Italy. So the experts predicted the coronavirus pandemic will last X before a return to normality. This X could be 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, or more than 2 years. And then we asked, based on this expected duration, do you plan to marry or cohabit in the next 3 years? From 0 to 10, and we asked the question also before the treatment. So the model that we run is relatively simple. We run a no-LS regression, first on the approximately 1,000 respondents that were already in a flat relationship, and we model the difference between cohabitation intention before and after the treatment. Treatment is a set of dummies for the randomized scenarios, which is our independent variable. We measured also imaginaries, so the type of family people wish to have through a variable on importance attached to cohabit with the partner. We control for the pre-treatment level of cohabitation intentions. We also control for a dummy that takes value 1 for those respondents who were not able to recall exactly which type of scenario they were exposed to. This is basically irrelevant. We also selected only we eliminated the few ones who could not really remember the scenario they were exposed, and the results didn't change at all. And then we also included a set of control variables on employment condition of both partners before and after the pandemic, and other socio-demographic variables. And the model is also estimated by sex and education. This is the model for cohabitation intentions. The model for marriage intentions is very absolutely similar. The only differences are that the imaginary this time relate to the importance attached to marry in the future their partner. And we control for a dummy variable for those who were already cohabiting, to distinguish those who were already cohabiting from those in a lat relationship, because here we have all the respondents, because we are modeling marriage intentions. And also in this case, the model is estimated by sex and by education, which means having or not a tertiary degree. So when it comes at the results, these are change. So we model the change in cohabitation intentions after the treatment by different scenarios. And what we see when we look at cohabitation intentions is that the scenarios didn't really have an impact. Imaginary related to the cohabitation still had a positive effect on cohabitation even after the treatment, and controlling for pre-treatment cohabitation intentions. This pattern of result didn't change much when adding the controls in the model, which is a sign of the exogeneity of our scenario, of our treatment. Then we try to model some heterogeneity in the effects by distinguishing between men and women. We did find some very weak and relatively uncertain estimates on signaling a positive effects of uncertainty on cohabitation intentions, post-treatment cohabitation intention among men compared to women, and among those with lower education, I mean, not tertiary education, but still this is, as you can see, the effects are not monotonic, and relatively uncertainly estimated. So all in all, the treatment didn't have quite an effect on cohabitation intentions, which could have been an effect of two opposing mechanisms. On the one hand, the pessimistic scenarios have a negative effect on union formation, and but cohabitation is still more compatible with uncertainty compared to marriage. In fact, when we run the model on marriage intentions or changes in marriage intentions after the treatment, we do see negative effects. Negative effects appear when for duration of emergency of at least 1 year, and increased for durations of at least 2 years. We still have an effect of imaginary related to marriage. Net of that, our treatment had an impact of marriage intentions, and the control didn't change at all the effects, even in this case. So these effects can be interpreted in causal terms. So the treatment was indeed exogenous, so the effect didn't change much with the controls. And this time we also found some heterogeneity in the treatment effects. More precisely, the effects were stronger for women if you compare the effects of more pessimistic scenarios of more than 2 years before the return to pre-pandemic conditions, and the effects were stronger for the less educated. So people with no tertiary education. These results are in line with, we argue, with the POD, pattern of disadvantage type of mechanism, right? So we also implemented additional models. So we tried to focus on women without tertiary education, and the effects—
Raffaele, you have 2 more minutes.
Thank you. I almost finished. And the effects are even more negative for women without tertiary education. You see an effect of minus 1.3 on the 0-10 scale of marriage intention. We didn't find differences by area of residence, notwithstanding the North was much more heavily impacted by the pandemic, which is suggestive of the fact that these scenarios work on imaginaries rather than objective conditions. Okay, and we also ran multinomial logistic regression, but I can skip this. I mean, results are absolutely in line with what I showed you. So to conclude, our results support a POD-like argument that cohabitation is more compatible than marriage, given the uncertainties of today's world and the pandemic. Talking about the mechanisms, respondents exposed to the more pessimistic scenarios may have anticipated possible job losses or shrinking household income due to restriction, government restriction, and so on. And this may hold especially for low-educated women in line with the POD hypothesis. But regardless of the mechanism that we cannot really understand, disentangle with our data, what is important is that a simple narrative of rising future uncertainty was sufficient to negatively influence marriage intentions regardless of respondents' socioeconomic status. So all in all, I think we provide evidence of a causal impact of narratives of a future on union intentions. Thank you for your attention, and thank you.